In the initial and final stages of the Second World War, the USSR was known as an expansionist empire. Thanks to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, they gained control over parts of Eastern Europe. And the same happened when World War II was drawing to a close. But in 1939, they granted Vilnius to Lithuania. Why did they do that is what you will learn today. Good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, I'm Stefan, Dutch history teacher, and I love to cover history, and preferably I do that partially on location. Like right now, I'm overlooking Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. If you find it interesting, consider subscribing, hit that notification bell. You can support me via Patreon, PayPal, buy me coffee, or via a super thanks. After the final partition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1795, Lithuania was absorbed into the Russian Empire. During World War I in 1915, Germany occupied western territories of the Russian Empire, including Lithuania, hoping it would declare Lithuania's desire to break away from Russia and form closer ties with Germany. In September 1917, the conference established a 20-person council that had to negotiate Lithuania's independence with the Germans. In the main resolution of the conference, the Lithuanians defined the outlines of their planned future state, an independent, democratically organized state within ethnographic boundaries, with the correctives essential for economic life, the final structure of which would have to be specified by a founding Seimas of Lithuania convened in Vilnius, democratically elected by all the people of Lithuania, and the cultural rights of ethnic minorities would be guaranteed. As a result, on the 16th of February 1918, the council issued the Act of Independence of Lithuania. The so-called Kingdom of Lithuania was born. On the 2nd of November 1918, the council adopted the interim constitution. On the day the armistice of World War I came into effect, November 11th, the new Lithuanian cabinet started to operate. After years of war, the guns finally fell silent on November 11, 1918. However, a powder keg exploded in Central and Eastern Europe. As old empires crumbled, new states emerged. There were wars between these states, as well as civil wars and wars of independence. In the years after the First World War, Lithuania was to become a battlefield where Lithuanians, Poles, Germans, Reds and Whites fought with and against each other. This is collectively known as the Lithuanian Wars of Independence. On the 12th of October 1920, the Poles and the Reds signed a peace treaty in Riga, which ended hostilities between them. The final Riga peace settlement between Poland and Soviet Russia was signed only on March 18, 1921. With the Soviets out of the way, Piłsudski knew the Red Army would not intervene, as he would take on Lithuania. Also, in the agreement with the Soviets, it was stated that the Lithuanians and the Poles had to sort out their own differences. But he could not just march into the Vilnius area and get away with it without the protest of the Allies. So he came up with a cunning plan. A staged mutiny. Polish General Lucien Zidegowski, with a force of volunteers recruited from the Polish-Belarusian-Lithuanian borderland, had to do the job. On October 6, 1920, Zidegowski's force, about 14,000 strong, started to move towards Vilnius. The Lithuanian troops they encountered were easily brushed aside. On the 12th of October, Zidegowski declared himself the leader of Central Lithuania, in reality a Polish puppet state. As a result, nationalist sentiments reached a climax in Kaunas, Lithuania, and many volunteers came forward that were willing to fight against the Poles and drive them out of Vilnius. The Poles, however, managed to keep their hands on the city, and they incorporated the city into the Second Polish Republic. Tensions remained. The city had a Polish and Lithuanian heritage, among others, and during the interwar period, the Polish government suppressed non-Polish sentiments. On the 1st of September, Nazi Germany invaded Poland after the Gleiwitz incident, a false flag attack perpetrated by the SS. The battleship Schleswig-Holstein fired its first shots at a Polish garrison at Westerplatte. Poland was simultaneously attacked by the Germans from the north and the west. The German armored vehicles, they smashed through the Polish lines. And if you think it couldn't get any worse, well, it could, because on the 17th of September, the Soviets advanced from the east. Nearly 500,000 combat troops assisted by 4,850 tanks, 5,500 armored vehicles and 2,000 aircraft. They were to capture Vilno, Grodno and Lvov within 48 hours. Okulich Kozarin had 7,000 soldiers at his disposal, ranging from volunteers to trained cadres with a dozen of artillery pieces and machine guns. The Poles, they resisted the Soviet incursion valiantly, but due to their sheer numbers, the Red Army prevailed. The Red Army officially registered 24 of their men killed in action, but most likely the number is higher. On the 10th of October, Soviet Minister of Foreign Affairs Vyacheslav Molotov made Lithuania to sign a treaty with the USSR to allow Soviet troops on its soil. At first, the Soviets were demanding the entry of 50,000 soldiers, but they reduced the number to only 20,000. In return, the Reds handed over Vilnius to the Lithuanians. Their long-cherished capital was now theirs. This somewhat sweetened the deal. But why did the Soviets give Vilnius to the Lithuanians, as they were planning to annex the Vilnius area and Lithuania proper altogether? Well, did you know that initially the Soviets planned to integrate the Vilnius area into the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic? On October 6, 1939, the first steps were made for this. In Soviet rhetoric, all the representatives of the working class, peasants and intelligentsia were agitated by all means possible to participate in the upcoming elections. The electoral meetings were organized in the larger manufacturing establishments, which were continued to operate despite the collapse of the local economy. All of Vilnius rallied to support the Soviet system and future incorporation of the Vilnius District into Soviet Belarus. At Lukitsky Square, the Soviet press claimed that there were over 75,000 people participating in the rally, promising that together with the working people of Belarus under the sun of Stalin's constitution, we will build a new and happy life. But this was not to be. See, to pressure Lithuania into signing an agreement of mutual assistance with the USSR and allow Soviet soldiers on its soil, the Vilnius district could be used as bait. Negotiations between the Lithuanians and the Soviets were made more difficult as their fellow Baltic nations, Estonia and Latvia, were forced to sign similar deals. Immediately after signing the Lithuanian-Soviet agreement, the Soviets started the process of confiscation, taking away nearly all its production capacities, mechanical tools, and the other equipment from the few remaining factories in Vilnius. The city's hospitals were stripped of all its valuable equipment. On the 17th of October, the Lithuanian army was ordered to march on Vilnius, but this was delayed. Lithuanian army leaders were aware of possible complications, Polish partisans or remnants of the Polish army that were still holding up in the area. Prior to the Lithuanian march on Vilnius, a group of 12 Lithuanian officers were sent to Vilnius to prepare accommodation and go over the details with the Soviet officers in charge of the city regarding the city's transfer. Soviet officers told them Polish students and the intelligentsia were opposing Soviet rule, and they would just as likely oppose the Lithuanians. It was announced that the Lithuanian army would arrive in Vilnius on the 28th of October. Order number 1 of the Lithuanian commander in charge of the city and of the area was prepared during the night from the October 27th to the 28th, 1939. The Lithuanian army moved into the area in close coordination with the Soviet military administration. The advance was too rapid, faster than the pace that had been agreed on. The troops had to wait in the surrounds of Vilnius. They only started to move into Vilnius on October 28th, 1939 at 11 a.m. Once the Lithuanian army was allowed to march into the city, the military parade followed. After this, Lithuanian general Vytautas gave a speech. He thanked the Red Army, which had liberated Vilnius from the Polish occupiers and maintained exemplary order in the city as well as keeping the economy intact, as he blamed the Poles for destroying much property upon retreating. The Lithuanian leader soon found out that it was the Reds that were to blame for the massive removal of industrial equipment and items of cultural heritage. Red Army security guards were substituted by Lithuanian army patrols, The Lithuanian army had a lack of men and motorized means of transportation to keep proper order. In a report, one Lithuanian colonel wrote the following: "The mood of the inhabitants is elevated because of the departure of the Bolsheviks and the entrance of our army. The Lithuanians are in the minority. Everything is dominated by the Poles and the Jews." The Jews were not extremely negative towards the new Lithuanian authorities, as many of them would like to quietly engage in business. The mood of the Polish society was unfriendly. This was temporarily because the Soviet terror towards them. They believed Lithuanians were better than the Bolsheviks. I need to emphasize that Lithuanians were back then a minority in Vilnius, but nevertheless a process of Lithuanization was set in motion. Everything was suddenly different. The advertisement boards, the titles of businesses, the names of owners and of offices. Everything was written in the Lithuanian language. The city became alien to the absolute majority of the owners. The Lithuanian language was introduced in state-owned schools. Jewish primary schooling fell into the hands of the state. The subjects formerly taught in Polish had to change into subjects taught in Lithuanian. The new official language became mandatory for all state employees. State servants who were unable to communicate in Lithuania were dismissed from their present positions and would be immediately replaced by those who had mastered the language quickly enough, or would be replaced by new arrivals from Kaunas, Lithuania. Complaints followed as groups of Polish intelligentsia claimed 90% of the city's population spoke Polish. After years of Polonization, a process of Lithuanization was set in motion. Yet this would soon transform into a process of Sovietization as the Republic of Lithuania gradually lost more and more of its autonomy. Lithuania lost its neutral political status and a degree of its sovereignty. Only the recovery of Vilnius, Lithuania's historical capital, was a ray of sunshine in an otherwise bleak situation. Furthermore, Lithuania had become dependent on the USSR, leading many members of the public to keep "Now Vilnius belongs to us, but we belong to the Russians." Full Soviet occupation occurred in June 1940 under the pretext that the Lithuanians had captured 2 Red Army troops. Molotov demanded that Lithuania would let in more Soviet army units in unlimited numbers. And did you know that the USSR was actually preparing for a battle to take Lithuania? Near the borders, they established field hospitals to help those who would be injured, and also barracks to house the foreseen prisoners of war. And already in the spring, the Soviets had secretly stationed Soviet spies who were able to speak Lithuanian and who had to come into action to seize power locally once the Soviets would invade the country. And clashes did occur actually, because on the 15th of June 1940, the Red Army attacked several border stations on the Lithuanian border. One policeman was killed, another one was captured, and others were disarmed. The Lithuanian government then discussed what to do, and ultimately it was decided that they would put up no armed resistance, because this would only lead to further casualties in a battle they were sure they couldn't win. And thus the government accepted the Soviet ultimatum. On the 15th of June 1940 at around 3 p.m, crudely violating all bilateral agreements that it had with Lithuania, the USSR ordered an indefinitely large military contingent, the 3rd and 11th Armies, unlimited by any treaties, to enter Lithuania and occupy the most important strategic points in Lithuania. Meanwhile, military aircraft packed with troops were landing in Lithuania's airports. The real power went to Vladimir Dekhanosov, the emissary of the Soviet government who arrived from Moscow on the afternoon of the 15th of June. He was assisted by a small Communist Party of Lithuania, the CPL, and of course thousands of Red Army troops. When all hopes of a Soviet-free Lithuania were dashed, many Lithuanians hoped that their country would not be annexed into the USSR, but this was not to be. When President Antanas Smetona left the country, this was explained as a president's resignation. A transitional puppet people's government was installed on the 17th of June. Justas Paleckis became the prime minister. The Soviets announced they would not make any further essential changes, and the key government positions went to communists. the CPL became the only legal party in the country and all non-communist parties were abolished. The Lithuanian military was disbanded and many senior officers were arrested or murdered. A People's Army was created and that unit was later absorbed into the Soviet 29th Rifle Corps. Many Latvians fled abroad to Germany where they founded the Lithuanian Activist Front, or the LAF, which was led by Colonel Kazys Škirpa. Others went into hiding, waiting to strike. Mid-July, elections were held. Public threats were made that persons who abstain from voting are enemies of the people. According to official data, the 14th to 15th July elections to the People's Seimas were attended by 95% of the electorate. A stamp certifying that the person has voted would be affixed in his passport, with 99.19% of them voting for the candidates of the Lithuanian Labour People's Union. According to the election law, candidates who received the majority of votes would be considered elected representatives. Half of the candidates polled less than half the votes, but the regime announced that all candidates were elected and the results were therefore fraudulent. A similar farce occurred in Estonia and Latvia. On July 22nd, the Lithuanian People's Seimas passed a declaration nationalizing all land, turning it into state property and making farmers land users. Banks and major industrial companies were also taken over by the state. The Seimas formed a delegation of 20 members, led by Paleckis, which went to Moscow on August 3rd, where they reportedly expressed Lithuania's desire to join the USSR. This formalized Lithuania's annexation, fulfilling the Soviets' imperial ambitions. Lithuania's institutions were soon staffed by experts brought in from the USSR who implemented the Soviet regime. Despite this, the internal border still existed between Lithuania and the rest of the Soviet Union. Agricultural reforms targeted farmers with more than 30 hectares, labeling them as kulaks, wealthy farmers and enemies of the people, and subjecting them to heavy taxation, tripling their tax burden. Landless or poor farmers could receive up to 10 hectares, while the remaining land went to the state, reserved for the establishment of the collective farms. Additionally, businesses with more than 20 employees were nationalized, leading to industries facing shortages of raw materials. Shortages of goods and long queues appeared. The introduction of the Soviet ruble alongside the Lithuanian litas in the fall of 1940 led to inflation. Personal savings lost value and citizens losing their bank deposits as financial institutions were nationalized. But the worst was about to come. In the night of the 13th to the 14th of June 1941, around 17,000 Latvians were arrested and deported by the Red Army. Many of them would never return. And then, on the 22nd of June that year, Nazi Germany invaded the USSR. Operation Barbarossa had commenced, and Army Group North swiftly moved to the Baltic nations towards Leningrad. Among its ranks were Baltic Germans who recently had left their country and were now assisting the Germans as they knew the language and the terrain. As the Germans marched into Lithuania, the June uprising occurred, in which 25,000 armed Lithuanians fought against the Soviets, occupying many strategic points. Suffering hundreds of casualties, cities like Kaunas and Vilnius came in Lithuanian hands before the Germans arrived. They proclaimed the Provisional Government of Lithuania. It was formed in secret before, now announced, and disbanded on German orders later, because the Germans did not care a bit about Lithuanian independence. Well, they were against it, and thus the Lithuanian institutions that had sprung up were disbanded on German orders. Lithuania was incorporated into the Reichskommissariat Ostland as the Generalbezirk Litauen. And so the Lithuanians changed occupier, although many Lithuanians were willing to work together with the Germans. The Lithuanians were probably the boldest in proposing collaboration. Colonel Oskaras Urbonas offered to organize an entire brigade to march in with the Wehrmacht, but the Germans wanted no such thing, preferring instead individual Lithuanians dispersed across Army Group North. If you're interested in Lithuanian collaboration with the Nazis, well, I made a video for you right here, and I also made a video about the Soviet occupation of Eastern Poland. Click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.